All right, I think we're good to go.
Good to go. Awesome. All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the April 28th Transportation Committee meeting, 9:30 a.m. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of May 31st, 2023, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure the meeting is as transparent as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. Committee members, please remember to state your name when making a motion or a second, excuse me. With that, turn it over to Lindsay to call roll.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We will start with Darwin Burkhart, Kevin Carrier,
Present.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Present.
Leah Mooney,
Here.
Jack Cruikshank,
Here.
Bob Dean, and IDOT OPMP, we've got both Mike and Brandon, who's going to be representing today.
Brandon, well, thank you.
And I see Bob Dean just joined. John Donovan.
Here.
Doug Ferguson,
Here.
Jackie Forbes.
Here.
Tony Greek. Chris Hebert. Scott Hennings. EDOT, we have Big Krishnamurthy or Jeff on. I think I saw Christina. Heidi Lichtenberg.
Present.
Eric Llewellyn.
Present.
Tara Orban.
Present.
Jose Rios or John Basic, IDOT D1. Mayor Rockingham. Joe Schofer. Chris Snyder.
Present.
P.S. Siraj. Tom Vanderwood. Audrey Wennick.
Here.
Kyle Whitehead.
Here.
Rocco Zucchero. And if you didn't get called, let us know in the chat and we will record it. Thanks.
Great. Moving along to item 2, agenda changes and announcements. 2.1, request for agenda changes. We don't have any that I'm aware of. Doug or Lindsay, anything else pop up? Not them. And as you may have noticed, Jessica Hector Sue is not with us today. She has left the RTA and taken a job with the USDOT's Volpe Center out on the East Coast. So we wish her well. I know she's still a resident in the area, so she said she may be following along or coming to join us from time to time. So we welcome her back whenever she wants to come. As the vice chair of the committee, I'll be serving as the chair, and we anticipate that the MPO Policy Committee will be appointing a new chair and a vice chair at the June meeting. So with that, 2.2 is Executive Director announcements. Aaron Alleman's here to provide an update on the CMAP agency and board activities. So good morning, Aaron.
Good morning. Thank you, Kevin, and thanks for stepping in an interim role here. I want to echo your appreciation for Jessica Hector Sue. Her participation in this committee over the years has always been helpful, insightful. She's continued to, really raise the voice of transit and the issues and challenges and opportunities that transit has. And through her work at the RTA, I know she was dedicated to the work of the region. And again, at Volpe Center, I think in her farewell note, she said she's not far away, and I think we'll be working on many of the same issues. So maybe we should all think about how we work better with the Volpe Center and get some technical assistance resources. Just a few updates here this morning. As you all are aware, And as we mentioned earlier, again, the governor's disaster declaration ends on May 11th. So we are virtual today, but after that, all public bodies in Illinois will be required to hold in-person meetings under the Open Meetings Act, which means that for the next Transportation Committee meeting, a quorum of the members will need to be physically present. Under the Open Meetings Act, or OMA, if a quorum of the committee is physically present, then the members can request virtual participation if their situation meets the conditions outlined in OMA and by our bylaws. Again, that request would need to be approved by the committee itself. So I just want to reemphasize that moving forward, put some travel time at the beginning and the ends of these meetings, as we get back into this after May 11th. In line with our mission and values, we will continue to allow for virtual participation for the public. At last month's board meeting, the CMAP board approved an updated public participation policy for themselves and for CMAP committees. You can find a copy on CMAP's website under committees, but essentially we want to make sure that the public and our many stakeholders are still able to participate virtually in our meetings. It's my pleasure also to share a little bit about CMAP's 2022 annual report. We did have a busy year with lots of exciting work to share with you and our partners. The report looked at significant progress made over the last calendar year and provides some highlights of our activities and ongoing partnerships, really focused on climate resiliency, our transportation system, and ensuring that we have a thriving economy while embracing and applying an equity lens. Related to transportation, the annual report highlights a couple of the projects that many of you participated in, and we really appreciate your participation in this work, and we would not be as successful without you. The Mobility Recovery Project and its recommendations to strengthen our transportation system post-pandemic. Again, the report talks about the launch of our ADA compliance program, the $5 million federal grant for our joint regional application with IDOT and the 6 of the region's counties towards building the Safe Travel for All roadmap, which will help us develop these countywide safety action plans. The work that we all did to come together around the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act and the priority projects we've put forth for this region. Again, not to mention $1 billion in federal STP funding and the 20 communities that were awarded programs and project support through our local technical assistance program. So as we move forward to 2023 and beyond, we'll look forward to continuing to serve, to shape, and to solve the region's most pressing problems together. You just make our work that much stronger. So I just want to say that it recognizes the work that we did, but anything that CMAP does is a collaboration and it couldn't be done without you. So thank you. We also launched our second State of the Region program last month. Again, thinking about public sentiment, we really wanted to understand what the public sentiment is around the key issues that are facing our region, and spotlight some of the excellent projects and programs that are being done to implement activities of the 2050 plan as well. The public opinion survey was specifically of Northeastern Illinois residents. It's statistically significant. Again, we really want to sort of think about how that opinion can shape what it is that we're doing and our technical assistance and our resources and how we might solve some challenges that the public's concerned about. Overall, I'll also share that residents' outlook remained fairly consistent since our last survey in the fall of 2021. 69% of people were satisfied with their ability to get to the places that they need to go, but residents still did want to see improvements in the frequency of service of transit throughout the day. They would also had a desire for faster, more reliable bus service. And I think it's also worth noting that 90% of respondents supported investing infrastructure dollars more equitably in communities with the greatest needs. So those are just a few of the survey findings. If it's helpful for you or your organization to dig into the details, we're happy to share them with you and provide you an additional briefing if desired. As part of this, we are also recognizing programs, projects, people across the region for our Regional Excellence Awards. I just wanted to note that there were 2 projects that I think that this committee will care about. One, the RTA's Transit is the Answer strategic plan, which offers improvements and revenue options for the transit system, received an award. And Project Zero, which is PACE's commitment to converting their entire fleet to zero emissions by 2040. So there are other award winners that we've been out talking to across the region, but those are two most relevant to this committee. So I want to congratulate PACE and RTA. It wasn't CMAP staff choosing these award winners. We actually had a team of people from other agencies representative of the region participate in reviewing and evaluating those, and those were their top selections for a couple of the awards that we had here. And then finally, just a IIJA update for this committee. I wanted to make you all aware that Federal Highway Administration released the Protect Discretionary Notice of Funding Opportunity last week. This program supports investments that improve the resiliency of our surface transportation system by reducing damage and disruption, enhancing safety, and improving equity. The projects that use green infrastructure or natural infrastructure to reduce flood risk and heat impacts are particularly encouraged for this competitive grant program, and applications are due August 18th. We are reviewing the NOFO right now. We do anticipate continuing to work with you, particularly through our IIJA working group, to identify potential projects for funding. Again, our regional transportation resiliency improvement plan, which is just getting underway, will help the region better compete for those Protect funds and other funding in the future. But it's a multi-year effort to help us understand which transportation assets are vulnerable to extreme weather impacts and equitably prioritize those investments. So we, again, as we have more details, we'll be talking with you all about that, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions. With that, Mr. Chair, I am happy to turn it back over to you or see if there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Any questions? Oh, Leah.
Not a question, a bit of boosterism. So it's great to hear that PACE's zero emission plan got an award. That's great and totally deserved. And CTA's Charging Forward report received an FTA award. Just wanted to mention that. One of 4 across the country.
That's awesome.
Yes. Thank you, Leah. Anybody else? All right, thanks again, Aaron. Moving on to item 3, approval of the minutes. We have before us the draft minutes from the February 24th meeting. I entertain a motion to approve those minutes in a second.
Lynette approved.
Thank you, Lynette.
Second by
Was that Mayor Rockingham?
yes.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Lindsay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, and I would like to acknowledge a few people have joined since we did roll call, but I think we will catch them in this round. We'll start with you, Kevin Carrier.
Aye.
Lynette Sciavarella.
Aye.
Leah Mooney.
Aye.
Apologies, I lost my page. And Jack Cruikshank.
Aye.
Bob Dean.
Aye.
Brandon Gibber.
Aye.
Doug Ferguson.
Aye.
Jackie Forbes.
Aye.
Chris Hebert.
Aye.
Thank you. Scott Hennings.
Aye.
Jeff Shriver.
Aye.
Christina Kopkowski.
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger.
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn.
Aye.
Tara Orban.
Aye.
For IDOT D1, I think we have Steve Schilke. Mayor Rockingham.
Aye.
Chris Snyder.
Aye.
Audrey Wednick.
Aye.
Kyle Whitehead.
Aye.
And we have Henry Guerriero for the tollway.
Aye.
And was there anyone whose name I did not call? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Lindsay, that passes. All right, moving on to item 4, approvals. We have Russell will be here to provide an overview of the fiscal year 23 through 28 transportation improvement amendments.
All right, good
Russell.
morning. All right, included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 49 tip changes contained in formal tip amendment 23-07 and the 226 tip changes contained in administrative amendments 23-07.1 and 23-07.2. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of $214.5 million in total project cost for all prior, current, and future years. Just a few highlights. As you may have heard, there's a bit of work being done on Kennedy right now. IDOT added about $28 million to that project in the tip during this amendment cycle. It's actually, if you clicked on 23-07, that's in the memo, it's actually the first project that comes up. As you also have heard from Aaron, PACE was awarded an award from CMAP for their Vision Zero, and PACE has made some tip changes that reflect that. PACE has continued to add funds in support of electrifying their fleet with $15 million to help replace diesel buses and another $60 million to support the North Division Garage Electrification Project. PACE also added another $20 million for a raise grant for the Harvey Intermodal Center. So those are some of the highlights of the changes that are in the memo. Administrative amendments added another $155.3 million to the tip in all prior, current, and future years. Thus, the net change for the total cost in the tip from all amendments resulted in $369.8 million being added to the tip in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, cost changes comprised most of the formal changes, and administrative amendments were primarily advanced construction, batch construction conversion, and schedule changes. Despite all the changes and additions, the tip is and remains fiscally constrained. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on April 21st for committee and public review. Approval of formal tip amendment 23-07 is requested, and if there are any questions, I can answer them at this time.
All right, great. Thank you, Russell, for that good information. I'll entertain a motion to approve tip amendment 23-07.
Tara Orban, motion to approve.
Thank you, Tara. Do I have a second?
Could I just interrupt for a second? Are we going to be having any discussion before we approve them?
Yes, we'll do I think a motion in a second, then we'll get into questions and discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Second.
Thank you, Jackie. All right, any questions or comments?
I do have some questions.
Sure, go ahead, Audrey.
Yeah, I had questions about 4 of the projects in the tip. So I can just go through them one at a time. I see there's a project with a tip ID 02941, which is a road expansion of Willow Road in Glenview in Prospect Heights. And I was looking at the location of the project and noting that it's through it crosses the Illinois Prairie Path and the Des Plaines River and connects an area that's green space that there are very few crossings along this area. So I was wondering if there's a road widening dimension, an add lanes dimension to this. I'm wondering if we'll be adding a multi-use path here and or connecting to the Des Plaines Trail as part of this project.
This is an IDOT project. I don't know if Steve Shelkey wants to weigh in on this project. He wants to unmute himself.
He's having trouble unmuting.
All right. That particular project, I don't believe that's an expansion project. I'd have to look into, but all of our projects, we do have complete the streets, so we would look at connecting all of those. So unfortunately, I'd have to get back to you on the details of that project.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great if you would look into that. Just it wasn't clear from the way it's described here. It does say reconstruction and add lanes in the project description.
I believe it's for the center turn lane, but I'll verify and get back.
Okay, thank you. I have another question about there's a roadway modernization of Old Orchard Road, and it's tip ID 02970006. I just wondered what the road modernization entailed and if it includes improvements to there's a bus route along this route, if it includes improvements to the bus route across the
I
station.
believe this is our Cook County project that is being combined with an IDOT project. So Cook County wants to talk about this project.
Sure. This is our Old Orchard, Russ. Is that the tip number?
I think it was 02970006.
Yeah, it's Old Orchard Road.
006. Yeah, this is the one that we worked on putting the bridge in.
Yeah, so this is a project that has been in our books for quite some time, and there are many multimodal elements, Audrey, to this. So it does expand. We do provide full sidewalk and bike path connection throughout the project limits. And so this includes the bridge over the Edens, which is state jurisdiction. So yeah, so it is a combined project with the state.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then the next one I wanted to ask about was in Lake County. There is it's tip ID 18100046. It is, I'm sorry, no, that's a different one. It's 10030005. It's a roadway expansion along Deerfield Road, widening to a 3-lane road. I'm wondering if there will be pedestrian safety measures added, given that the crossing length will be increased for this road.
So Kevin, this is your project. I'll let you guys this.
Perfect, and I'm still unmuted, so that's perfect timing. Yeah, this is a modernization project similar, I think, to what Steve was talking about with the first one. So we're adding a center turn lane, so it's going to be going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. There is going to be dedicated crossings. I think with RRFBs, I have to check with the project team there. So I think they're looking at some sort of a median with RRFBs on that one. For those crossings, we coordinated that with the municipality, and then there's going to be a bike path along the entire project, and then where the municipality wanted sidewalk, we're adding sidewalk as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
And then the last one I wanted to ask about is I see there's tip ID 18100046, which is a Metro project. It notes rehabs and improvements to parking lots. And I wondered if Metro has gone through an evaluation of whether any of these parking lots could be redeveloped into transit-oriented development, and whether it's appropriate to be to repave them now as we're thinking long-term about regional rail.
Yeah, Audrey. Yeah, this is Lynette. So Audrey, we are in the process of doing that. The ones that are in the actual program are ones that are being utilized and do have to get taken care of immediately. I know you've been in contact with David from my team about some of the TOD pieces, and we said that we would get back to you and have a longer discussion with that, but we're a couple months away from doing that.
Yeah. And just for the committees, so that they're aware, the funds that were added by Metro to the tip for this project are programmed in 2027. So there is nothing immediate that is happening with these funds. So there's still time for them to work through their process.
Great, thank you.
I have a follow-up question. So, and I think this might be for you, Russell. Like the, if it's listed as add lanes, that could include like a 2-way left turn lane. Is that correct?
It would depend on the length. Typically, add lanes means adding capacity. So
Okay.
if you turn a turn lane into a through lane, that could be considered add lanes. So I will say one thing just for the committee's reference, when you see and you hear mention of a TIP ID, the middle 2 digits refer to the year that the project was added to the TIP. So in the case of all these projects that we're looking at and have been discussing, some of them go back to 1994, some of them go back to 1997, 2003. So these are long-standing projects that have been in the TIP for literally decades for some of them. So there's a lot that's been going on with these projects and a lot of development in multiple phases and things of that nature. So just for future reference, when you hear a TIP ID, that's just a little bit of how the nomenclature works.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Lindsay, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yep. We'll start with you again. Kevin Carrier,
Aye.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Aye.
Leah Mooney,
Aye.
Jack Cruikshank,
Aye.
Bob Dean,
Aye.
Brandon Gibber,
Aye.
Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Chris Hebert,
Aye.
Scott Hennings,
Aye.
Jeff Shriver, Christina Kopkowski,
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
Aye.
Steve Shilkey,
Aye.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Mayor Rockingham,
Aye.
Chris Snyder,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
Kyle Whitehead,
Aye.
and Henry Guerriero.
Aye.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. Motion passes. Moving on to item 4.2, fiscal year 23 FTA sub-area allocation between Illinois, Indiana, and Illinois and Wisconsin. Russell will present FTA sub-area allocation on this.
I'm still here. All right. Included in your packet was a memo. It shows the funding splits for FTA funds for 2023. Just for frame of reference, RTA, SewerPAC, and NERC have already agreed on the funding splits, and they've each signed their documents that signifying that they are approving the funding splits that are shown in the memo. What we're asking for is approval of a recommendation for the MPO Policy Committee to approve this. So it's fairly straightforward. This is an annual thing that we do. If there are any questions, I can answer those at this time.
All right, I will entertain a motion to approve recommending the FTA sub-area allocation. Yep.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
I know this has already gone through a number of discussions in advance of being approved by the RTA Board of Directors, and I just noted that the memo didn't really include a lot of information about the methods for identifying the split, and are those based on population or some other metrics? Are they in line with historical splits? Is there any sort of additional info that you can share?
They are in line with historical splits. I believe we had somebody from RTA. I don't know if they want to comment on it, but this is no different than what we've done every year with these fundings. The mechanism to divide them up between the different entities is fairly well established. There was nothing that was done this time that I'm aware of that was out of the ordinary or different from what we've done in the past. I don't think it's entirely based on population in terms of splits. Some of it depends on the service that's provided. For instance, if you look at the amount that goes to Wisconsin for some of the stuff, I don't think that they have rail service. So I think that they don't get any of the rail funds or something of that nature. But if RTA is on the phone, on the call, they can address this more if they would like to. But there was nothing that they gave me that was different than what we've been given in the past.
Yeah, Russell, this is Kyle Whitehead from RTA. Everything you've said is accurate. It is in line with historical splits. I don't have more detail on the different criteria that were used, but I'm happy to have somebody from RT follow up with you, Leah, or the committee if anybody else is is interested in more detail.
Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Russell. That's fine. I can also, work internally with our finance department on that. But I think it would be helpful if the memos that are providing background and then asking us to recommend for approval by policy committee could actually provide a little bit more background when they're created, just so that I guess everything is easily accessible to us.
Okay, we can do that.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, that's some good feedback there. Any other questions or comments?
Well, hey, real quick.
Yeah.
We should have a motion and a second, and then go into questions so that we can make sure that all the questions have been, answered. We can go ahead and do the roll call. So we haven't did the motion and second yet.
Correct, Mayor. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll start with the motion second, then ask for questions. So I will entertain a motion to approve recommending the FTA sub-area allocation to the MPO Policy Committee for approval.
So moved. Mayor Rockingham.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a second.
Cruikshank.
Thank you, Jack. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none. Lindsay, can you take a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Kevin Carrier,
Yes.
Lynette Ciavarella,
Yes.
Leah Mooney,
Aye.
Jack Cruikshank,
Yes.
Bob Dean,
Aye.
Brandon Giver,
Aye.
Doug Ferguson,
Aye.
Jackie Forbes,
Aye.
Chris Hebert,
Aye.
Scott Hennings,
Aye.
Jeff Shriver, Christina Kopkowski,
Aye.
Heidi Lichtenberger,
Aye.
Eric Llewellyn,
Aye.
Tara Orban,
And I just want to note, oh, that was Steve Schilke needed to be unmuted. I thought it was Jeff.
Steve Schilke,
Aye.
Mayor Rockingham,
Aye.
Chris Snyder,
Aye.
Audrey Wennick,
Aye.
Kyle Whitehead,
Yes.
and Henry Guerrero.
Aye.
And anybody I missed? Okay. Thanks.
Great. Motion passes. Moving on to item 5, the informational items. So Laura Wilkinson will be here today with some more info and work that's going on in the part report, and is joined by staff from the transit service boards that will be discussing operational efficiencies along with revenues, governance, and system improvements.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good morning, Laura. Yes.
All right, so as usual, I'm here to talk to you guys again every TC meeting this year about where we are in the initiative for the Plan of Action for Regional Transit. So I'm going to get down to it because I know we have a lot to cover today. Go to the next item. I want to just kind of do or next slide. Overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm kind of going to go backwards today. We normally talk about the system improvements and funding and governance, but I'm going to touch on governance, talk a little bit about the funding, again, being joined today by our other TC members to talk about some of the issues that we've been hearing about from outside stakeholders so that we can address some of those here today with you at TC, and then give an overview of the system improvements and the timeline. I will say we are about halfway through this, and we are knowing that this is a very quick process. Any of the items in the system improvements and funding and governance could probably spend a year or more on each of those, each of the items. So we know that we're going to be talking about a lot of this, and there's a lot of detail that we'd be happy to follow up on, but we're going to try to present as much of this as possible as we go through. All right, moving to governance. Yep, and then you can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to kind of share with you guys, as we're sharing the same information with all of the public bodies, we had not talked to this team yet about how we're approaching the governance part of the mandate that we are being asked to look at through this legislation. And I think that what I wanted to share is, as we're approaching this, we didn't want to just say, what are the different structures that are out there, and let's change all of these things. We really wanted to have, as again, as CMAP approaches many things, right, through an analytical process of what is it that we're solving for before we go to results and solutions. So we've spent some time in conversations in a lot of the different bodies that we're a part of to try to understand what we think the challenges are, and then to look at what are possible solutions for that. So we've been in discussion again on what is it that the problem is, and then we're working with Eno to look at what are some of the different case studies and models that are out there that would approach each of these items. So I'll just share with you in the next slide that the themes that we have been hearing about, that people have concerns about the current structure, is really this connecting issue of decision making, and where is that happening, and who has that, and how is that working at a regional level, with kind of sub issues of, are we addressing service coordination in the best way, funding allocation in the best way, are we looking at accountability, and how those issues are affecting these decision making, and then what are the role of the state and other entities in that process when we think about a whole multimodal system, and are we working in that avenue, in that vein. So that's what we've heard from the different stakeholders. And next slide. So what we want to say is, when we look at different solutions, how do they impact? Do they improve? How is it being run through that criteria of those different themes? And then we have the themes of the general part, right? Project itself. Does this get us to financial sustainability, equity, and mobility for the system? And then how do we actually implement it through feasibility, timing, and who controls those different spaces? So I wanted to express to this group that we're kind of approaching the whole governance piece of the legislative mandate through that lens. And we'll probably be talking more about that. We'll get to the timeline later, but later this summer. Not so much today. But I do want to pause because I know that's an item that is of interest to this group. So next slide is just, I wanted to make sure I gave a moment to see if there's anything that you want to make sure that we consider as we continue to explore governance reforms, changes. Leave it at that. So I just want to make sure I give a moment if there's anything people want to share with the CMAP team.
Great, thank you, Laura. Anyone want to offer anything at this time? All right.
Great. Well, we'll move on to money. This is everybody's favorite topic. So next piece of this is the funding options. We really want to kind of update all of you on the exploration of what we're looking at. And again, we're exploring different funding options at this point. So we're not recommendations, it's an exploration. So I want to get everybody's input and thoughts. So this slide shows us, and we've shown this to you before, where the current revenues come from for the transit system. And so I'm going to spend time just kind of talking about each of the pieces, not so much an explanation, but where we're going in the funding. So next slide. So that first bar at the top, right, is fares and system generated revenue. So when we're looking at how we could make this system financially sustainable in the future, and building into a system that we want, right, the system improvement pieces that we've been talking about, we're going to have a space that we're going to be talking about what do we do with fares, fare policy, fare integration, increase in fares, what is the space that we need to be doing changes within our fare structure itself to help this move forward. So we kind of have a bucket of different things that we're looking at that are just within the fare space. Next slide. So you move down, you get to the other space, right? This is where we have the City of Chicago RET. You have other things like transfers from capital, ADA dollars, things like this. So we have different thoughts and things we're exploring within this space about where new and sustainable revenues that would be in the other category that we want to explore. Okay, next slide. Move down the bar, right? Now you get into state support and sales tax. right? So what we're looking at are what are the different things that we can do to modernize this resource that would be a benefit for transit riders. So there's a lot of things in the sales tax space, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them. And we talked a little bit about that as well last TC meeting. So next slide. So if you think about all of those different buckets, the RTA, again, in this last strategic plan process, presented 11 revenue options. So again, we start to go from what are the different places we're getting the funding to what are some different options. And so again, this is not new to any of you, but move forward to our next slide. What we've started to do is look at those different buckets. So when we were thinking about sales tax options, we're also looking at, we talked about it last time, as goods are going down, the growth in services going up. And so one of the places that we're talking about investigating and doing analysis is not just on the sales tax, but on a tax on services. As services continue to increase, what would be the possibility of using some of those funds to help our transit system? And so we're looking at, again, different options and opportunities, recreation services, food services, utility, healthcare, et cetera. So what would that revenue option look like for us? So that's one of the considerations that we are doing some analysis to bring forward to our different stakeholders. Next slide. Another one of those places and different revenue options are road system revenue options. So this, again, are some of the different things we're exploring to see, again, how much revenue it would actually bring in. Is there feasibility? What are the legal obstacles? And how will that fit into the puzzle pieces of the different finances and financial opportunities that we want to look at? So again, this is something we're doing research on, and we'll bring back information to you on what we find and what we would like to move forward to recommendation and have conversations with you about that. So next slide. One of the other components that we've been talking to everyone about and getting some information and feedback from is, as we start to talk about new revenues, which we really understand that we are going to need for the system to continue and to expand and to improve. We've gotten a lot of questions from people on what's the state of the current system. How are we being good financial stewards of the current system? Where are places we can find savings and efficiencies in the current system? So we've really got feedback that before people want to talk about revenues, they want to talk about savings and efficiencies. I think many of us in this audience have had many conversations about our transportation system and where we're, trying to find improvements, and also that we're in a space of not being able to find the answer to the $730 million gap within the couch cushions, that we are really going to have some difficult conversations about new revenue. But I also don't want to discount that there is this concern or interest in what we're doing with the current system. And so to address those issues, we've asked each of the service boards to provide some information to this group today about what they are doing, again, in this efficiency bucket. And so I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Mike Connolly first from CTA to talk about what they're doing, and then we'll kind of come back into that system improvements conversation. But I want to give each of them the opportunity to share where they are in that space. So I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning. I'm Mike Connolly. I'm the Chief Planning Officer at CTA. I wanted to share a brief set of information with you, recapping the highlights of what we shared with the How to Pay For It members of the steering committee last week. I'll quickly cover fare and past trends, the shape of our operating budget, a peer comparison, and some examples of belt tightening we've already done. If you don't mind, go on to the next slide there. This is a sort of a brief summary of the material that's in this presentation. Some of you already know CTA delivers more than 80% of the regional transit trips, and we compare very well with our peer systems. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought dynamic changes to all of us in this region and across the country. The CTA portion of that $730 million regional funding gap is over $400 million. To me, the most serious aspect of the impending revenue shortfall is the impact to the entire regional economy due to potential lost travel, increasing travel time, and increased automobile trips. This comes as the most recent look at the metropolitan congestion puts Chicago as the worst metropolitan congestion in the country for 2022. The potential environmental impacts of losing or deeply reducing our transit system are sobering. If you go on to the next slide. Our fare and pass revenue recovery began in 2021 with a steady improvement through the first months of this year. We have discounted the pass products to encourage ridership. You may already know that we worked with our partners at Metra and PACE to offer integrated regional pass projects, making the CTA and PACE products the same across the board and providing a better unlimited ride monthly product with Metra, CTA, and PACE included, with better coverage and a lower price. I'll just remind you that, and people have talked about this, but the concept of using fare increases to solve that $730 million fiscal gap is not a wise choice for the region. If you don't mind, go on to the next slide. This slide provides a look at the shape of the CTA operating budget. As you can see in the pie chart on the left side of this chart, labor is about 70% of our total costs for our system. It's the big blue wedge there in that pie. The right side pie chart breaks out our union employees. Over half of them are bus, that's the blue section. About a third are rail, that's the red section. And the remainder are various craft unions, including carpenters, electricians, iron workers, and others. Our two largest union contracts expire at the end of 2023. And the craft union contracts already expired at the end of 2021 and are currently in negotiations. If you don't mind, go on to the next slide. This slide is a peer comparison for us, looking at us and compared to MBTA in Boston, SEPTA in Philadelphia, MARTA in Atlanta, LA Metro, MTA in New York, and WMATA in Washington, DC. The blue bars are the 2019 operating expense per trip, and the red bars are the 2021 operating expense per trip. Pre-pandemic, we were well below $4 per trip, and even with the current ridership running at about 57 or 58% of 2019 levels, we're doing better than any other peer agency at 8.1 per trip. If you don't mind, you go on to the next one. This is something that the steering committee members had asked specifically about. And I think you'll hear from the other sister agencies here as well. This slide lists several of the measures CTA has undertaken to reduce our operating costs. Because it's the biggest portion of our budget, labor, we've had to focus there. We've frozen or eliminated positions. We made changes to our healthcare coverages and increased the co-pays while negotiating savings in maintenance prescriptions with our pharmacy provider here. We actually structured the way that the wage increases were implemented to reduce the impact, saving about $28 million per year. Our purchase of diesel fuel is a huge percentage of the regional market. We use that to negotiate futures deliveries, which are highly predictable to our advantage. We know how much fuel we're going to need in the month of June each year. And so we have a regular program as well of overhauling buses and replacing older models to save costs in addition. We aggressively pursue leasing for storefront spaces in our stations and for advertising on the system to gain non-fare box revenue, which was a section of those bars that Laura had talked through when she talked about where the revenues are for the system. We fought for and got a ground transportation tax imposed on all ride-hailing trips in the city of Chicago. The city has since eliminated that payment to CTA, so that's no longer available to us, but it was a good idea, and it was something that we worked very hard to get put into place to have that help fund public transportation. If you don't mind, go on to the next slide, and that's a thanks to you for listening, and I'll pass this back to Laura to introduce the next speaker.
Yeah, I guess I just want to pause there. I didn't give time for questions on my revenue options, which I can come back to at the end. But does anyone have any questions for Mike before we head to PACE?
I do have one, Laura.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Sorry, if I can jump in, Mike, and this may apply to Metra and PACE as well. I think it does, but I saw on the one slide, the cost per trip has gone up from like $3 and some change up to $8 post-pandemic. Can you tell maybe a little bit about what's caused that, operational changes or things like that? What's caused that increase, or do we know what's the trigger for that?
Frankly, the trigger is the denominator. It's the number of riders. So that's what's driving that. So with fewer trips being made, the same expenses have a much higher expense per trip calculation.
Okay, gotcha. So that's got ridership baked into it too. Then
yes, it does. It is, because it is. That's what's baked into there. And I'll just point out one of the items that you may have noticed. LA Metro is at 8.6, very close to ours for 2021. But they actually went fare free for the whole year of 2021, and so their ridership zoomed up dramatically and helped to lower them from, they were above $13 a trip in 2020, and they lowered to 8.6, very close to where we ended up. But they were fare free that whole time, so they had zero revenue coming out of fares, but they did, because they went fare free, they did have a big boost in ridership during 2021.
This is John Morris from Metra. That would be similar story for us.
Great. Well, again, if people have more conversation or questions for Mike, we can come back to the end of this too. Why don't we hand it over to Eric or Melanie from PACE?
Morning. My name is Eric Llewellyn, and I'm the Chief Planning Officer for PACE. Next slide, please. The impending fiscal cliff is a result of the significant ridership decline and major change in travel patterns caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. This issue is not unique to Northeast Illinois and is occurring at other transit agencies across the country. While PACE did see a significant drop in ridership, the percent decline in riders was smaller compared to other modes due to the importance of the bus network in serving essential workers and trips during the pandemic. Fortunately, ridership has rebounded from the lows seen in 2020 and 2021, was up to 18.1 million rides in 2022, an 11.2% increase compared to the previous year. In fact, ridership on our ADA service has already returned to pre-pandemic levels. PACE continues to see ridership gradually increasing system-wide in 2023. While system-wide ridership is improving, it is not expected to return to pre-COVID levels in the near future. Additionally, federal COVID relief funding is expected to be exhausted by the end of 2025. As a result, the RTA estimates there will be a $730 million annual operating funding shortfall in 2026 just to maintain the system that we have. PACE's share of that deficit is $60 million per year, but that only allows us to maintain current service levels. It is important to continue to invest in the transit system to maintain the ridership momentum we continue to see and to address the feedback we have heard through the recent update of PACE's strategic plan, Driving Innovation, the RTA strategic plan update, Transit is the Answer, and CMAP's mobility recovery work, in which regional voices have asked for more service and additional fare options. Melanie Castle, PACE's Department Manager for Budget Planning and Analysis, will now provide additional background information on the budget for both suburban and ADA services, as well as how PACE performs compared to peer agencies.
Good morning, everyone. I am Melanie Castle. I am the Department Manager for Budget Planning and Analysis with PACE. If we could go ahead and move to the next slide, I'll go ahead and walk you through our pre-COVID and sort of COVID recovery performance for suburban service and a comparison to our peers, as well as the same information for our ADA service, which can honestly be treated as almost a separate service board. So PACE's system-generated revenue for suburban service has been significantly impacted by the decline in ridership since the onset of the pandemic. While ridership has increased slightly in the intervening years, our 2022 suburban service ridership is still down by roughly half from pre-pandemic levels. The reduction in ridership not only impacts our fare box revenue, but also other non-fare revenue, as route eliminations and reduced ridership results in reduced local share contributions from municipal and local business partners. Total suburban service expenses, however, have only grown 4.5% from 2019 to 2022, when adjusting 2019 expenses for maintenance efforts that were transferred to a capital project. Overall labor and fringe expenses have only increased 3.6% from 2019 to 2022. Like many other employers, PACE has experienced staffing shortages in recent years, which has had a positive effect on expense, but we do expect labor and fringe expenses to grow in 2023 as a result of robust recruitment efforts and partnerships that PACE has entered into with local community colleges to hire and train new operators. The largest driver of expense increases from 2019 to 2022 is fuel. While fuel consumption has stayed relatively level since 2020, the average price per gallon PACE pays for diesel has increased from $1.34 in 2020 to $3.56 in 2022. When you exclude labor and fringe and fuel expenses, all other PACE expenses have only grown by 1.1%. Decreases in purchase transportation and liability insurance can be attributed to reduced service and ridership, and decreases in health insurance can be attributed to staffing shortages. These decreases have offset growth in other goods and services expenses, which will have been affected by inflation. Moving forward to our peer performance on the next slide. This shows how PACE performs in relation to its suburban bus service peers. RTA has chosen 5 peer agencies for PACE, which are suburban bus-only services, which operate adjacent to large metropolitan areas. The data presented for each agency is for the 2021 agency fiscal year, which can vary from July 2020 to June 2021 for 4 of the agencies, to PACE, which operates on a fiscal year, a calendar year fiscal year. We have highlighted 2 measures of service solvency and 1 of service efficiency. Compared to our peer agencies, PACE has the highest fare revenue per passenger and fare recovery ratio. Additionally, PACE's cost per passenger is in line with our peer agencies, despite serving an area that is 8.5 times larger than our peer average. Moving forward to our ADA paratransit service on the next slide. PACE's ADA service has rebounded much more quickly than our suburban service, demonstrating how crucial these efforts are to the lives of our ADA certified passengers. While base ridership is only down 13% from 2019 actuals, farebox revenue is down 39%, but that is due to the suspension of the $3 taxi access program fare. The TAP fare was suspended during the pandemic to encourage riders to migrate to this service. Taxi service is able to accommodate single rider trips for rider safety, and it alleviated capacity pressures on our paratransit vendors, which have experienced the same staffing struggles as other employers. Additionally, RTA suspended its ADA certification program in 2020 until reinstating it in May 2022. PACE collects reimbursement revenue from RTA for providing trips to and from the certification site, which impacts our other revenue totals. The largest drivers of expense increases from 2019 to 2022 are purchase transportation and, similar to suburban service, fuel. Unlike suburban service, all ADA paratransit service is provided by outside vendors. While purchase transportation expense has only grown 11.6% from 2019 to 2022, just based on sheer volume, that translates to $19 million in expense growth. Prior to 2020, PACE was responsible for suburban ADA fuel expenses, and City of Chicago ADA fuel expense was included in our vendor contracts. In April 2020, PACE added Chicago ADA fuel expenses to our in-house fuel contracts in order to realize savings on taxes and bulk purchases. This increase in consumption by adding the Chicago ADA program, plus an increase in the average price per gallon from $1.66 in 2020 to $3.24 in 2022, has resulted in a $5.7 million increase in fuel expenses from 2019 to 2022. Purchase transportation and fuel account for 92% of 2022 total ADA expenses. Remaining expenses for labor and fringe, insurance, and other goods and services have actually decreased 6.5% from 2019 to 2022, demonstrating PACE's commitment to control costs wherever possible. Moving forward to the next slide, and the ADA peer performance, RTA has also selected a number of ADA paratransit service peer agencies operating in major metropolitan areas. As with our suburban service peers, fiscal years between the agencies, start of the fiscal year does vary from July 2020 to January 2021. Looking at the same service solvency and service efficiency metrics as our suburban service, ADA paratransit service performs in line with our peers in all 3 measures and also has the second lowest cost per trip of our peers. That is it for the sort of finance and peer performance portion of it. I will turn it back over to Eric.
Thank you, Melanie. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. PACE has taken a number of steps to ensure that we are operating as efficiently as possible. We continue to be innovative in the way in which we provide service and in how we use technology to lower costs. As an example, we have partnered with transportation network companies, or TNCs, to supplement ADA service. This service provides both flexibility for the rider and lower operational costs for PACE in the region. We have introduced a new van pool program called Van Go as another way to offer first and last mile service options at certain Metra and CTA stations. We've expanded our on-demand program to replace underperforming fixed route service. We're in the process of launching a new pilot service in the O'Hare and Harvey areas that will connect third shift workers with overnight PACE and CTA transit services. We are soliciting bids to conduct a network revitalization study that will evaluate existing service and determine potential opportunities to meet existing and projected future transit needs throughout our service area. We have introduced bus on shoulder or flex lane service on I-55, I-90, and I-94, and have future plans for service along I-294. Finally, we have partnered with Transit App to explore mobility as a service, commonly known as MOS. MOS aims to make it easier to get around without a car and to extend the reach of our network by aggregating information on different PACE offerings, such as on-demand and other PACE services. To control costs, PACE eliminated poor-performing services, instituted a temporary hiring freeze, and temporarily suspended fares for the Taxi Access Program, or TAP, to encourage ADA riders to switch to a more cost-effective service. When it makes sense to do so, we regularly seek out opportunities to partner on joint procurements and cooperative agreements with the other service boards or other public sector entities to realize additional savings. As Melanie previously mentioned, PACE is in alignment with and performs better than our peer agencies from both a performance and efficiency perspective. However, the impacts of the pandemic are such that the services being provided today cannot be funded in the future through efficiencies alone. It's important to continue to invest in the transit system to maintain the ridership momentum we continue to see, and to address the need for more service and fare options being requested by the region. With that, I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Great, thanks Eric and Melanie. Are there any questions for Eric and Melanie about PACE's activities or efficiencies? All right, well, hearing none, we'll turn it over to Metra.
Okay. Good morning. I'm John Morris. I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I'm joined with Alan Oshab, who's the Senior Director of Budget and Management to represent Metra today. Go to the next slide, please. Metra represents $187 million of the $730 million gap in 2026. If we look at the graph, we will see our budgeted expense for this year is $980 million. It represents a return to full service mode compared to the prior 3 years, reduced service, and it is driven primarily by operational labor, motive power, and support costs. Our growth is primarily due to inflation and also new initiatives. For example, positive train control, which is a safety program mandated by the federal government. Hit the next slide, please. With our budget of $980 million, we actively seek to minimize our operating expense every year. And how do we do this? First is we have monthly expense monitoring. We have an analysis team under Alan that works with all divisional and department managers to review their spending. And they also collaborate with the departments on strategies to be able to stay at or below budget. We don't have a use it or lose it type of situation. On procurement side, like our partner agencies, we do utilize competitive public bidding process to minimize expenses. And we also take advantage of opportunity to share services and contracts with our sister agencies, as well as our partner railroads, BNSF and UP, on items such as our retirement plans. We identify and execute on efficiency opportunities, and here since 2015, we've saved nearly $200 million. One of the biggest areas that represents more than half of that is our in-house rehabilitation of locomotives and passenger cars. We have not only reduced the cost of doing that, but instead of shipping this out of state, we're able to use Illinois workers and put that money into the Illinois economy. We also have IT initiatives to reduce costs, moving things to the cloud. And we've also joined with PACE and CTA on the Ventra app to reduce costs. These efforts have allowed Metra to be able to avoid fare increases as well as keep our budget balanced. And in the future, we're looking to purchase vending machines for tickets at all stations, which will streamline the ticketing process. We're looking to purchase new cars, which will improve the passenger experience as well as reduce maintenance costs and improve uptime. We're also looking at a new payroll system for efficiencies. Next slide, please. We look at our operating expenses. Similar to our partner agencies, our costs are comparable to our peer agencies, which are operating mostly in the Northeast corridor. So you see the dollars and the ranking in the key metrics. These are pre-pandemic. Next slide, please. And I'll wrap up by talking about the key factors that we evaluate to guide our planning. Most important is ridership, and we want to know when they're going to be returned to office and what are the patterns, which lines, which times. Also, we're looking at highway construction. As you probably note, the Kennedy is a mess right now, and that's driving a little bit higher ridership for us. And on the long term, we're looking at supporting expanding access to opportunities throughout the region. So we know employment in the suburbs is increasing, and they're looking for workers, and we're looking for ways to get them from areas with people wanting to work. Another area affecting all agencies is inflation. It's negatively impacting our wages, benefits, materials, and services. On the positive side, it does boost our sales taxes. And like the other agencies, fuel cost is a major cost for us. We're impacted by war, national policy, and supply chain disruptions such as refinery fires and strikes. And what we do is we work on strategies for price stability and predictability. We have a number of environmental changes, operating environment changes that we're working on. One is new unfunded federal mandates. We've mentioned PTC and or positive train control. And we've seen in Ohio with the rail derailments that have occurred, there may be additional federal initiatives, and they tend to be expensive. And we have the integration with the UP, which should result in efficiencies or be cost neutral. And we have to take that into account. In summary, Metra looks to reduce cost growth, increase ridership, and increase non-passenger revenues. However, the opportunities here are small compared to the magnitude of the funding gap. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thanks, John. Any questions for Metra? Again, I'll pause before we move on to system improvements. If there were any questions about the different revenue options that we're exploring as we move through this. Again, I think all of us that have been in the government sector for many years understand that typically when we talk about needs and new revenues, it is coupled with people wanting to know what we're doing with our current structure and efficiencies in our current space. So again, wanted to make sure that we gave the service boards the space to provide that information to you, to our different discussion group members, but also wanted to make sure if there were any questions about, again, as we explore different revenue options, anything we should be taking into account or concerns that you have as we start to do that.
I just wanted to emphasize a few points from the RTA's perspective. The $730 million gap that we're projecting starting in 2026 is not the result of inefficiency and bloated budgets, right? It's the result of structural changes in the economy stemming from the pandemic, fewer people traveling to work Monday to Friday. And I think you can see that in looking at peer regions, right? They're also looking at operating gaps of around 20%. All these regions, transit systems seemingly have varying levels of efficiency, and our systems is quite efficient, as my colleagues just demonstrated. Also, when we talk about quote unquote efficiency and belt tightening, we're primarily talking about labor, as was just demonstrated, and these are the people that are driving our buses and trains, cleaning them, maintaining our stations, playing a really critical role in the region. And as we know, even at current levels of pay and benefits, the operators are struggling to hire and retain people to drive trains and buses and maintain the system. So when we talk about those costs, I think we have to keep in mind what that means. And when we look at cutting labor, we're talking about cutting routes, right? And these are often low ridership routes that play a really important role in communities across the region. They have significant political constituencies and significant political support because of their impact on people's lives, because of their impact on equity, and our other regional goals. So I just wanted to emphasize those points from my colleagues in their presentations.
Thanks, Kyle. With those words, I think there's a lot we're talking about and not wanting to cut service, but expand and improve, which is the system improvement section of our conversation today. So if we want to head to that, again, when we've started to look at all of these things in the space, we really want to make sure that we're sticking with our principle, that we're not going back to 2019, but we're moving forward to, so what Kyle was saying, we're not cutting, we're not losing service. Actually, what we've been hearing from a lot of people is we need more, we need expansion, we need better connections. And so that means that we not only have to look at the operating needs of our system now, but also what we want it to be. And so that's a lot of the conversations we've been having in the system improvement space. We've had conversations and really come to finalize our analysis around the improvements we're thinking about in the better buses, fare integration, affordability, and the affordability of both of those items, safety and security to the system. We're just starting to wrap up the system accessibility, both on physical accessibility, ADA issues, as well as technological accessibility to the system and regional rail. And so we're starting to kind of work through those analyses. And then upcoming, we're going to talk a little bit more about land use issues and TDM opportunities, as well as more operational efficiencies and service frequency, which we really see as a link to a lot of these different things as well. Next slide. So like I said at the beginning, we could probably spend a year on each one of these issues that are in this chart. And we're going to be providing more information to you in the space of white papers, or again, videos that we've shared again with you guys before. But we're really focused in kind of three spaces in the better bus area, which is bus priority infrastructure, what we can do with automated enforcement for bus lanes and bus stops, and then the public sector capacity roadway agencies. So I know that people's eyebrows will perk up in this conversation. So again, I think we've talked to you guys about really how do we make this a multimodal system as opposed to siloed. So we're really looking at how do we have spaces where the roadway agencies and transit are more integrated instead of siloed. And so that's really being able to have staff capacity that can handle a lot of the transit related issues. So those are some of the different areas that we're going to be moving forward into recommendation space. And so again, we'll be seeing more on each of these. And I'm sure if there are questions, we can do any follow-up from this group. The next slide is, again, we've moved towards closure and moving on the different topical areas about fare integration and seamless travel. So what we've been talking about in that space, right, is establishing a structure, that can achieve these regional fare policy goals, and then has the required funding to ensure long-term sustainability. So it's kind of the three areas of where the different topics align. We also know, and you'll kind of see at the bottom, that a lot of these, right, we can't silo even into our topical conversations. They really run through how to pay for it, how do we implement it, and so we know that these have impacts in other areas of our conversation as well. So you can see where some of these connections are happening. I do think that we are very interested in not only how we're going to improve our fare system, but then also, next slide, is how we make this affordable as well for all of the people within our region, which has an equity lens. So we not only talk about how we're going to ensure that the fare revenues support the transit operations, but also how it will maintain fare affordability. So we do talk about subsidies, and we have some different recommendations that we're going to be bringing forward about how we think we would approach those fare subsidy components as well. And again, these definitely cross-cut again all the conversations that we're having. The last slide that I have here is about safety and security. This is another space we've had a lot of conversations. We know it's been of top of mind for a lot of our stakeholders. So it's something that we're focused on trying to address. And again, we think there's really three spaces these recommendations will be in. One is it's about staff presence. People would like to see people on the train, see people at stations. We talked about transit ambassadors. So we have a lot of ideas in that staff presence space. Again, it's rider communication. We've had a lot of conversation about people being able to feel like they can report and get feedback. And so we have some different thoughts in that space. And then the next one's physical infrastructure. The other thing we hear consistently, and I know the service boards have heard this before as well, is really it's about the stations, lighting, the safety and security of the actual bus stops and things like that. Restrooms is another issue that has come up in a lot of different conversations. So different things like this with the physical infrastructure. Again, one of the cross-cutting topics is also frequency. When you have frequent and reliable transit, people feel safer when they know that that's coming. So this is another space where we're going to be continuing to have thoughts shared with you on final recommendations. Next slide. Again, as I said, there's so much we want to be talking about and so many different parts of this, and we have only a few more months left before we get to that September where we really want to have the final recommendations. So between those kind of July and September TC meetings, we're probably going to need to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with all of you about the different recommendations that you're interested in or that impact you. Next slide. So just to kind of give that timeline, again, in this interim, we're going to be sharing white papers and recorded presentations about all of those different slides and topics that I talked about before. We're going to try to wrap up all of those system improvement recommendations in June because they do impact how we pay for it and how we implement it. And then we'd like to provide information that kind of, again, this analysis of what are all the menu options on funding and governance in June. And then in the July, we'll have the funding and governance alternatives for us to have the conversation. Again, in September, where we're bringing the actual draft recommendations that would move on to MPO and our board in September. Any questions on all of that? Again, I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, and I wish we had a whole nother year to be doing this, but on a mandated timeline. So
I have a question.
Yeah, Jack.
I was wondering a little bit about the congestion price you were talking. You mentioned it being in the central business district. Have there been discussions about tolling our highways as a result, kind of in relation to the central business district question?
Yeah, so kind of going back to that, road system, we are talking about tolling and adding either, we're talking about what are the different options, opportunities, concerns, considerations around either tolling current highways or adding new tolling or adding, increasing existing tolls on where there is tolls on current highways or adding tolls to highways. So both of those, as well as the cordon pricing of the central business district. Okay. So those are all in that roadway system revenue menu of alternatives.
Great, thank you.
Laura, when we're thinking about that menu of road options, are we also considering the potential impact on transit ridership and how those options change people behavior, right? It's not just a way to raise revenue, it's also a way to incentivize sustainable travel. So looking at the extent to which they might drive people's travel behavior.
Yeah, mode shift type of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I think Metro mentioned it, I'm experiencing it right now myself. As my train has gotten very crowded since the Kennedy construction began. So,
Laura, Chris Snyder.
Yep.
A couple comments. I think I raised this at a prior meeting with regard to, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this. I'm just pointing this out. It's nothing that we all don't know, that if you're looking at road use taxes, you know, to what Kyle just said, if you're going to look at that, transit has to be an option. Okay, this shouldn't be a punitive tax. Okay, you own a car, you live someplace and you work someplace that there isn't a transit option, and so it shouldn't be. You know, we should be looking at corridors that have transit in proximity that you can say you're making the choice to drive when you've got a train parallel to you, 290, Kennedy, et cetera. So I'm not just really advocating for that. I'm just saying when we look at some of those tolling or managed lanes, that if transit's an option, that would probably be responded to differently than if you're in an area that you don't have transit. I know we talked a lot about we don't want to reduce services. I know in DuPage, and I'm not calling out PACE, they've done analysis and they identified 48 routes that just weren't, you know, just weren't serving a purpose anymore. And they found other ways to fill that gap, or we'll be looking at that. So I don't know if the other service boards have looked at, you know, here's our routes we have, here's our service, and here's where on this day of the week, this route continues to have high ridership, but on Mondays and Fridays, it's a transit desert. No one's going into the city. And so whether service density services have been explored to say, okay, in terms of other operational efficiencies. I think Metro said 90% of the riders are back 2 days a week. And so, you know, is that 5 days? Is there a day of the week or times of day? We're seeing in DuPage a lot of midday trips are occurring more so than the peak hour. We talk about raising revenues, but I'm not hearing raising ridership. You know, what are we going to do? And I know we've discussed it internally that this whole 730 is based on the presumption that the service we had in 2019 or that we have today is just going to kind of continue. You know, there isn't money here for expanded service, new service. But new service doesn't have to be an extension of something. It could be a replacement of an old, for example, the bus service in DuPage. I know PACE is doing a kind of a route survey, a route revisiting, a route restructuring, or at least looking at it in DuPage. So just throwing that out.
yeah, and let me say one thing on that. Yeah, it sounds so boards want to weigh into. So Chris, to your first point about the tolling, that's definitely something we've heard and are taking into consideration about that link between transit and tolling. I think the other thing that we're trying to bring forward, right, is that we, and what we've heard, and I think that's the system improvement space, is how do we get riders back on the system, right? It's not just the forced, you know, movement, but like, how do we improve this? How do we have connections? How do we have service that brings people to the system? Maybe it's not even back, right? It's a lot of the connections and service. And one of the things we've talked about is, you know, this kind of the spiral of if we cut things, then people won't have the ability to see that the service is there, and they won't come to the system, and then we have fare revenue. So what we don't want to do is really put, you know, cuts forward on service. We really want to look at what we've heard is people want more service. So it's like, how do we expand the system, and then how do we do that well? I know we're going to talk a lot more about service frequency and kind of what the expectation and best practices are for that, so that our consumers, the users, the employees are getting the service that they need. And I know that's you know, a key point of this, I think, especially in the conversations we've been having with a lot of the counties, right, that they want to see improved service as we move forward. Lynette and then Leah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Chris, thank you for that. Our focus of our presentation today was really on operating efficiencies, and we've had conversations with CMAP. I think future presentations might be in the area of service, but let me just start by saying Metro just released our strategic plan. We adopted a new strategic plan in February, which will take us over the course of the next 5 years. That strategic plan looks at moving the agency from the traditional commuter rail that everybody knows Metro has been for a number of years, right? That is our past, to moving us to what we're calling regional rail. You've seen us, as we've started to add service back to our schedules, start adding additional service in to areas where we hadn't had service before. That is all under the idea of trying to gain riders. Our number one focus is moving the agency forward and trying to find additional riders. So in addition to the strategic plan, in addition to some of that work that's going on, we have a study underway right now. It's called the Route Restoration Study. That study is looking at big data and trying to figure out what the markets are, where people are moving. That study will complete by the end of this year, and that'll be looking at improvements we can do on the service side for the 1 to 3 year time period. At our March board meeting, we approved a contract for a system-wide network plan. That is a larger study that will be looking at our service as well as some of our capital investments that we have across the system to try and figure out how we right size and move the agency forward. That is a 2-year effort that will kind of take the data that we've got from route restoration and then move that forward for longer term improvements. So we are knee deep in these studies. We understand that we can't continue to operate the service that we've always operated. And we are looking at how we reimagine Metro moving forward. And like I said, we kicked that off with our strategic plan. And now we have these 2 pretty high intensity studies diving into our service. So I think you'll start seeing additional changes from Metro as we move forward.
Leah.
Thanks, Laura. And Chris, thanks for engaging and asking some questions so we could dive into this a little bit more. I think it's great to have these conversations in TC. I have so many thoughts, but I'll try to sort of focus and be limited. But I know that we'll be coming back and talking a little bit more about ridership trends and service. So I think we'll have opportunities to kind of dig into some of the topics that you raised in the next meeting. And I guess I would just highlight a couple key things that have been on my mind since really for some time. I guess one of them is that CTA has really, I think, been driven in the past by our need to actually be highly productive, focused almost exclusively on growing ridership or having a high ridership proportion and that's really been driven by some of the fare recovery ratio and the subsidies that were in place already. And that has really, I think, impacted our ability to think about the experience of existing riders, right? And so there is a desire to bring people back on transit for a number of reasons and to grow ridership. But we also want to think about what's the service that we're delivering to people that are already choosing to use transit. And I guess I would also highlight that, if I think Laura mentioned this, I'll just sort of briefly highlight it again, that as we sort of cut back to really sort of maximize like the number of people on a bus or the number of people on a train to be highly efficient, what we then end up doing is having less regular service, and that becomes less convenient for people. And then that's kind of how we lose riders. And you really have to have some type of regularity. And what we've heard from riders is that they really need reliable and frequent service in order to be able to depend on us and to use us, especially where they're making connections. Anyway, so I guess the other piece is that in terms of the point that you made about really you should focus the road user charges where you have a transit alternative, I guess I would sort of put back that everybody has an alternative, right? Land use choices choices about where we locate jobs and where people choose to live. Those are choices as well. And we all have externalities that then we, you know, that are related to those choices that we make. I think that really one of the factors that, and Kyle, thank you for posting that really interesting article on LinkedIn. I'll put it in the chat later, or maybe you can while I'm talking. It was about the new book that's coming out on the history of transit funding and would really inform this whole process really well. But it talked about an aggravation factor, which I thought was really an interesting way of thinking about it. And that, you know, one of the drivers that as we looked, even going back to Onto 2050 about what would increase mode shift, it was really making it less convenient to drive, both in terms of cost of parking and then congestion. So, you know, we're always trying to sort of resolve congestion, but congestion is the friend of pushing people onto sustainable modes. So all of that said, I guess I would say all of us benefit from the positive externalities of transit, whether you have a transit option near you or not. And I would say we all should think about paying for that as part of a workable society. And Mike had mentioned earlier just the importance of having that as a public utility. Okay, that's it. I'll stop talking now. But Chris, thanks again for asking those questions.
Again, I keep using these metaphors, right? Of like this conversation is addressed for rehearsal for what we're going to be talking about, needing to talk about next year. What's the legislation on this actually gets debated. So I think these are good conversations to have to kind of bring these issues up and be able to bring them to light. I think Jeff, you were going to say something.
Just to quickly build on the last few comments that were made, which I completely agree with, and I think this is a really good line of discussion, that it seems that if we want transit to be attractive for prospective riders as well as existing riders, and it needs to be perceived as being available and useful, and it seems like that's kind of a three-legged stool, and frequency is certainly a part of that, but coverage and span are two other legs of that stool, and I didn't see those explicitly covered in there. And I know frequency we talked about and was in one of the slides, but I think, you know, if we're talking about service standards or what should prospective riders and existing riders be able to, I guess, you know, but what are they entitled to in terms of transit service in our region? It seems like coverage, span, and frequency are all three important metrics.
No, I appreciate that. And I think we're going to start diving into some of those things as we get into that next little space of operation and service. So pass that along and keep it in mind.
Hey, Laura, if I can jump in too, I just want to say, not at risk of cutting off, this is a great conversation too, but just being mindful of everyone's time. And we do have another presentation on our RSPs coming up. So maybe if there's, you know, one or two more questions or comments out there, we can continue the discussion. I just want to try to be respectful of everyone's time there.
Yeah, or people can also reach out to me directly and we can try to address any questions. So.
Yep, and then I think in June, like you mentioned, we'll have some more discussion with, you know, the services and stuff like that too. So.
Yep, thanks.
Sarah, any more questions for Laura, the team? I had a couple quick hitters on the $730 million, you know, the shortfall. I think Pace mentioned being like $60 million of that. I think Metro mentioned their share of that too, which I couldn't get in the notes here. And then I didn't know if I heard one from CTA. Do we have that information available? Just kind of what, you know, the breakdown of which service board has of that $730 million, or is that information we could share out too?
Yeah, Kyle, I'll pitch that one over to you.
Yeah, I don't know. CTA's portion is 400 million. If Leah or Mike want to confirm that, but I believe that's what Mike just reported. And Kevin, you had Pace's number. I can pull up the numbers, but I'm trying to do it.
Yeah, what I was going to suggest. This is Mike Conley, Kyle. What I'll suggest is we'll get that, and between RTA and the three service boards, we'll put that together and get it to this committee, so you have that. Okay.
Yeah, and then my follow-up question too is if we can get the deck as well. So Laura, if maybe we can just kind of share that out to everybody, the deck, and then those numbers would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
All right. If there's nothing else, Laura and our friends at the service boards, this is great information, great discussion here. A lot of hard work, going on and getting close to being halfway through it. But there's a lot more work to come. So we appreciate everyone's time and efforts into this. Moving on to 5.2. Martin Menninger will be with us here. He's going to be presenting on the development of a new transportation project analysis tool that will be used in the analysis of RSPs as we look towards the upcoming 2026 plan update. Martin.
Morning, everybody. Let's see. Yeah, I unmuted myself. So, going to talk to you, as Kevin said. Thank you, Kevin. About a project we're calling the Transportation Project Analysis Tool that will mostly be used for evaluating RSPs or regionally significant projects. Could potentially have some applications beyond that. But first, let's talk about what RSPs are. Next slide. I think most of you are pretty familiar. As part of our long-range plan update, we are required by federal law to evaluate significant projects in the region. Last fall, we adopted a plan update that had 71 projects in it, pretty evenly split between transit, expressways, and arterials. For that update and for our last few updates, we've used a threshold of $100 million and impacting capacity, or $250 million for projects. Although we've been asked to look at that threshold, that's a separate project. So these are things like rebuilding 290, Red Purple modernization, rebuilding Lakeshore Drive, sort of the biggest transportation projects in the region. And one thing to keep in mind, actually, next slide. Really what we're doing is not assigning money to these projects, although it is part of our fiscal constraint. Really what we're evaluating these projects for is alignment with regional needs and our long-range plan. And then once we've sort of done that process, we look at them for as part of our fiscal constraint. So this is not attaching specific funds to projects, but sort of assessing their alignment with our long-range plan. Next slide. So as part of that process, we generate a document we call the Regionally Significant Project Benefits Report. That report has a bunch of tables in PDFs for a whole bunch of measures. One of the goals of this project is to make that data more accessible and more useful to CMAP staff, and hopefully more useful to project sponsors and our communities. As part of that, we are looking to sort of update some of the information we're using. Next slide. So the first step in this project is a peer review and literature review, where we looked at some peers in the region and across the country to see how they are measuring projects. That step is largely complete. It was done by our consultant, High Street. And I'll talk a little bit about what they've found in a minute. We are moving on to the second step of the project, partner outreach. So talking to you today and some other committees. Then this summer, we're going to build the tool in a sense. So this will automate many of the steps that CMAP does to output these measures. Hopefully it'll lower the workload on CMAP staff, make it so that we could potentially generate this more than once every 4 years, be more involved in maybe the alternative analysis stage of a project, and make them a little more understandable, as I alluded to earlier. Then this fall, we're going to be thinking about how we use all of this data. So it's really something we're keeping in mind throughout the project, but how do we connect this data to the decisions we're making? And what does that workflow look like? And how do we make the best decisions? Next slide. There's a few familiar faces on the committee today that maybe have already heard this presentation. I spoke earlier this week with our climate and regional economy committees. Talking to you today But I want to talk a little bit about the CARE group that I spoke to. Next slide. Earlier in the month. So CARE is a group of community benefit organizations throughout the region, representing ethnic, racial, and geographic diversity of the region. They're experts in their community and have been working with CMAP staff to reveal some institutional blind spots. I got a lot of great feedback from them. I want to share just a little bit of it. So one thing I talked about is how we've really placed an emphasis on maintenance in the past rather than expansion of the system. And they expressed concern that historically underserved communities would be locked into existing infrastructure if we only focus on maintenance. They said, we want our infrastructure to be as nice as infrastructure we see in other parts of the region, but it's not. They talked a lot about how they see a lot of transportation projects that they don't feel are for them and don't address local needs. They talked about it in terms of being for tourists, which I thought was pretty interesting. And they talked about their difficulty coordinating on small improvements and that expressed some skepticism that, you know, they could really have an impact on bigger projects when they can't get the small improvements that they have to fight so hard for, things like building a new sidewalk or a crosswalk. And then finally, they talked about how they felt that decision-making should start with the people, with the needs of the most marginalized people in our region, which I thought was a great point and something I think we need to do more work doing. So great feedback from the CARE group. I'm looking forward to going back to them with, again, to talk about the progress on the project. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we did a literature review, peer review as part of this project. The consultant broke sort of the performance measures we use. We've got about 50 or 60 of them that we've used in the past, and they broke those into 10 categories when looking at peers and looking at our measures. These are those 10 categories. We've been working through them with staff internally to sort of compare what our peers do to what we've done in the past, and thinking about new data that we've got. Our model has some new capacity. We've got some new information about jobs and employment. We're thinking about equity in new ways. So each of these could potentially be tweaked or adjusted based on some of the new information we have since we developed these measures about 6 years ago. Next slide. This is a lot of text, but a good example of one measure and how we could potentially change it. As we looked at the peer review for our sort of accessibility measure and travel time measure, we found that peers looked at more than travel to work. CMAP's measure was travel time impact, I'm just gonna read it, work trip travel time for a 5-mile buffer around a project. Our peers used a broader set than just work trips. They used shopping trips, school trips, retail, healthcare, and other trips in their accessibility measure. The other thing we found is that we are somewhat inconsistent in the geography we analyze. So for this, we used a 5-mile buffer. But for many of our measures, we used a travel shed of the project. And so we want to go through all of our measures and think through what the proper geography is and do some analysis around how changing the geography of what we're measuring might change the data we put out. Next slide. All right. I have some discussion questions for you. First, we are going to be forming sort of working groups with key stakeholders. I imagine many of you will be involved with that over the next month or two. How should we engage with you, and what data do you have that we should be using? How can our evaluation project be more useful to you? Is there information we can generate that you could use to make your projects better or help you evaluate them. And then what are your thoughts sort of on the past process and how we can improve it for future evaluations? And with that, Kevin, I've got one more slide, but I'll open it up for discussion.
Great. Any questions or comments for Martin?
Martin, I think this is great. I'm excited about this process. I guess to your last question, I would just want us to consider alignment with regional goals and targets. And I know we in the plan and elsewhere commit to reducing transportation emissions, reducing SOV use, growing transit ridership. Even pre-pandemic, the trends in those areas were not positive, right? So the major projects that we're funding and the extent to which they are making those things better or worse, I think should be considered when we're thinking about how to revise these metrics moving forward.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, one question, Martin, on the kind of the bike ped sidewalk side of things too. One thing that we always have is struggle with is trying to get data on just sidewalk usage, bike ped usage, stuff like that. So I don't know if that's something that could be considered as part of this, just, you know, existing facilities, what's the usage on it, and then maybe even projections for, hey, if we build it, they will come type of thing. You know, we get that question too, like, hey, how many people do you plan on using this bike path? So if that's something that could be done as part of this process, just something I want to throw out there. So
yeah, absolutely. That's something we've sort of been struggling with. Many of these projects are sort of conceptual phase, so they're out, that the engineering hasn't been done, they're out 15, 20 years in the future, and then some of them are 4 years in the future. And so we have varying levels of information, and it seems that some of that bike ped information and improvements, those are some of the last details to be finalized a lot of times. So we're thinking about what we can do with the information we have to some extent. And we do have good crash data, so that's one area we're looking to.
great. Any other questions or comments for Martin? Yep, Leah.
I am also excited about this work. I think it's a great project that you guys are involved with. And one of the things that I've heard mentioned by others and that I'm also interested in is, I think, looking at projects through a lens of induced demand and being able to better capture that. And also you know, we look a lot at air quality, but those metrics typically don't include carbon impacts. And so just looking at that greenhouse gas measure would be great, both of those things.
Absolutely, thanks.
All right, I got Bob and then Kyle.
Hi, everybody. A question I had, Martin, when you're looking at equity on projects, which I know is a priority you mentioned, one of the biggest just pieces to look at is who the beneficiaries of a project will be, which isn't always the same as where it's located. So I know that's a challenge for anyone who's trying to do this. I'm just curious how you've gotten into deciding who benefits for particular projects.
Yeah, so the way we do this today, in the past, is we've looked at sort of the benefit to the whole region and the benefits to our EDAs. So what we estimate the usage by zone and have identified specific zones as part of our EDAs. So we know what share of users of the project, or what's our share, what the travel time impact for our EDAs has been. It's sort of an open question if we continue to use those EDAs or come up with some new equity definition. We're looking at Justice 40 and a couple other things, but definitely want to sort of have as many measures as appropriate, have sort of the regional benefit and sort of the vulnerable population impact.
All right, Kyle.
Yeah, Martin, I'm curious if as part of this process at all, we would look at the extent to which RSPs have or have not gotten funded historically, and why some projects that have been listed as RSPs for some time are not advancing. I'm thinking of the City of Chicago BRT group in particular, but I'm sure there's other examples on that list. Just seems like there could be value for us to think about what we as a region can do to get those projects funded and moving forward. I'm not suggesting it's CMAP's responsibility, or in the case of BRT, it's just CTA or RTA's responsibility, but how can the organizations represented on this committee, if these are identified as regional priorities because they score so well, how can we make sure that they're advancing?
Yeah, and I think that's part of a larger conversation we've sort of been having with our IIJA working group. That's going to be soon, thinking about what we put out as a region as a priority, both RSPs and non-RSPs, and how we prioritize those together. So I think that's you're right to say that's part of this process, but it's also part of a larger process and conversation that we are going to be having over the next year. So,
Audrey.
Yeah, that question made me also think about historically how we prioritize projects, and criteria are essentially a forecast of how a project will perform. And it would be very useful, I think, if we look back at some projects that have been built and saw how they performed as, what was projected in terms of benefits, and then how they performed. That could be an informative exercise in terms of understanding how performance measures, how accurate they are, how useful they are in terms of making decisions about future investments.
great. Yeah, that's feedback I got from the Regional Economy Committee too. So I think it's a great point. Thanks for that, Audrey.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, Martin, I think you said you had one more slide left, maybe.
Do have one more slide. Maybe. All right, so I'm going to be developing working groups, reaching out to some of you over the next 2 months to sort of get into the weeds on some of these measures. How do we measure transit capacity? It's very complicated, things like that. And then this summer, we'll come back to you, sort of report out on the results of those working groups, the recommended measures that we're hoping to go forward with, and get some more feedback on those. And then, like I said, in the fall, we'll be coming to you to discuss sort of how we use this data and show you what the tool can do. So appreciate your time today.
Great. Thank you, Martin. This is good information. We look forward to hearing from you later this summer.
All right.
All right, moving to item 6.0, legislative update. Looks like there's no update for today, but staff, Laura and staff are available if there's any questions. Seeing or hearing none. Moving along to item 7, other business. Is there any other business that the committee members like to bring forward today? Jack.
Thank you. Just for everyone, I know I emailed it out to most of you, but so everyone knows, on behalf of IDOT's Office of Intermodal Project Implementation, we have released a notice of funding opportunity for transit planning funding. That is for any project that has a transit component that is statewide, must be led by a public agency. It's a relatively small amount compared to the numbers we've been discussing today, about 2.5, maybe 3 million. But given these are perhaps $200,000 projects, that could fund 10, 15 of them. So that call closes May 24th. And again, any kind of planning, bike planning, capital needs, ridership demand, BRT planning, anything that has a transit component. Also can have rail and aeronautics, as those are also under OIPI. But again, any project would still need a transit component since it is FTA funding. On that note, I also wanted to bring up something. We've been talking a lot lately about battery electric vehicles. I just wanted to note that we have a couple agencies that statewide that are interested in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. It is something that I personally support very strongly. I think that that is an option that limits our need for charging, also limits our need to source batteries, right? Because you need fewer batteries because the hydrogen itself is producing it. And then the charging takes maybe 20 minutes, right? Compared to 8 hours or something. So those are both things that I'm excited about. Champaign currently has 2 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles on the road. They have the capacity to produce the hydrogen on site for up to 30 vehicles. And these are articulated buses that they have at the moment, so 30 large vehicles. So that's just great. No action item here, just kind of wanted to put it on everyone's radar. I'm sure you've been hearing about it, but that is something that we are supporting. And we have a couple other agencies looking to build out potentially the capacity either to produce the hydrogen on site or have it trucked in and support vehicles that they are using for public transportation. So that's something, and I'm excited for the DOE application that we have submitted recently as a region for the hydrogen economy to DOE. Another thing wanted to bring up was, I know that we don't have a ton of time today, but wanted to bring up that the 2022 Illinois Highway Safety Plan does set a goal of getting to 0 fatalities on our highway network. That is something that I am interested in discussing more with this committee, perhaps at a future meeting, for the purpose of setting our 2024 goals. Right, so at our December meeting, we had some good conversations about this. What should the number be? In January, when I attended the TRB in DC, we had the chair of NTSB talking about how all of our goals should be 0 fatalities, right? Vision Zero should be our #1 goal. That is something I agree with, and I would love to, it doesn't necessarily mean right now, but in maybe the next meeting, hear more from CMAP staff about the process of potentially setting our own goal for the CMAP region rather than using the, what was it, 1088 goal that IDOT had set, because I don't think that's a good goal. Given, are we supposed to be excited if we set that, if we meet that goal? You know, I mean, I know I'm preaching the choir here. You all understand this, but that's something that I would be interested in. Kevin, what are your thoughts on this? On maybe talking more about that at a future meeting.
Yeah, and I was going to kind of ask Doug or CMAP staff the same thing. I think when we come through, usually at the end of the year, I think it's an annual discussion that we have, and we have had that, back and forth in terms of, do we want to just match IDOT's target, or we want to set a different one for the region? So that is a time where we can have a little bit more robust discussion. I don't know, Doug, are there any thoughts on or opportunities to have anything in advance of that? Or
I would defer to Martin here. He's our head of performance targets. So Martin?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. So CMAP has a 0 target for 2050. And that last time we looked at it, that was generally in line with the rate for that IDOT is setting. And that's reason we've supported IDOTs in the past. We agree it's time to sort of open that back up. In fact, we've been encouraged by FHWA to sort of think about setting a target different from the state. I think so we are going to be doing that this year. We are launching a large Safe Streets for All initiative, and so we're potentially going to be including that as part of the conversation and coming to you talking about that program. But so we'll be talking about that over the summer. In the fall, late summer, we will start the discussion and bring you new analysis and options for what the target could be, whether that's support the state again or diverge on our own path. And then in the late fall, we will sort of make a recommendation, again, likely in December, to the MPO, whether we want to continue to support the state. So that's sort of the timeline, but hoping to have a lot of that discussion this summer.
Great. Thank you, Martin. Yeah, I know to me at the December meeting, it kind of felt like, yeah, well, our options are to do this, right? So I would love to hear more. Yeah, September before December, that would be awesome. So thank you for your efforts on that. Yeah, looking forward to the STAR program and what's happening there. Final thing, kind of related to this question of long meetings, what are we doing? Wanted to know if there was any update from CMAP staff, anyone else, about working groups, right? So what is, I know a couple months ago that was basically going to happen, and now I haven't heard a ton about it. Love to know more if there's been any updates on that.
Doug, anything? Yeah.
Yeah, no update at this point in time, but I will definitely follow up with staff, specifically Alex, and we'll get back to you on that. We'll have something for the next meeting.
Okay, so I take the board did not act on this topic then, that you know of?
I see Laura is looking to talk,
Okay.
so I'm gonna.
I was just going to bring about the IIJ working group. I can't give a update on everything else, but we are going to try to. You all should have received a survey from us about how the IIJ working group went. We got all of that feedback, and we're compiling it right now so that we can start the IIJA working group on the priority booklet again. Later this spring, so that is moving forward. But yeah, I think Alex, who's not here today, is probably the best one to give an update on where everything is, so Doug and staff can follow up on that.
All right, thank you very much.
And I just would like to, Kevin,
No,
if you
you're
don't
good.
mind,
Go
I
ahead,
just
Sarah.
wanted to add, I think, Jack, prior to you starting to serve on this committee, safety it has been on top of mind and a priority for many of the committee members, which has led to things such as, like, there was a safety resource group that was prepared. CMAP hired Victoria. There's a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. So I feel like what has happened, my observation is many of the substantive discussions that have happened in the past several years have resulted in some offshoots into other initiatives that are like outside of this committee now, and that we will continue to get reports on. So I hope that a little bit of background provides some more context for you.
Yep, definitely. Thank you, Tara.
Great. Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Jack. Any other business? Seeing none, moving along to item 8, public comment. If members of the public haven't done so already, please notify staff in the question box and they will notify committee and unmute you. Doug or Lindsay, do we have anyone from the audience today that wishes to make a public comment?
I've got a hand raised here. Hold on one second. Looks like I'm going to unmute Garland Armstrong.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Kevin and Kyle. This is Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, Illinois, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. I just would like to comment concerning especially echoing about what is happening right now for the fiscal cliff coming in 2026. I think y'all should have the federal lawmakers look at this too, because once they see it, their head is going to be going into a chaos. Says what? The RTA said that their budgeting will be $730, close to $1 billion in 2026. I think the federal lawmakers should intervene along with the state lawmakers and the local lawmakers to see what is going to be happening down the road. So if it's going to be a fiscal cliff. So I think y'all should get the federal involved in it too, from your congression, from your district, so they can see it firsthand, the data and everything, what is going to be happening down the road, so that they can get their eyes up and then send this to the nation's capital, so that other cities and other states should be well prepared if they have that situation too. So how they can set up a working group in a situation like this, because God forbids, if it does happen, that means it's going to be a lot of fallouts and protests over it, saying what is happening right now. And that means we need to figure out a big solution on how to get this thing well prepared, because we don't want more deficits to be happening down the road. And then we don't want the ADA to say this is going to be a big protest over it. So that's why we need the federal lawmakers to work with the state and the local and the stakeholders to be extremely well prepared for this one. And also too, for the taxing thing, I think you should let the billionaires see this firsthand, that transit is the answer, because they have no ideas about this and they're dodging it all the time. So I think that billionaires need to take transit for the first time and see what is going on and how they can get more improvement of it in areas of it so that they could see transit is definitely the big answer and it's the big shoulders of it because they've never experienced it before. And I think it's the first time that they need to see it firsthand, up close and personal, so that they'll say, I never thought about this before. Well, now's the time. It's long overdue. And I think you should definitely be on top of that. And then also, like maybe taxing like when you said about the hotel motel tax, that's what I think some people are really fearing of. But we definitely need that for the transit part, especially when tourists is coming into town as vacation visitors, want to use their system and want to find a place to stay. Because I think that's a good idea to tell them about that because it's going to be for years and years to come. So when people wants to know where can we stay and how we can get access to the system for CTA, Metro, and PACE, and they want to know the closest hotel or motel, and they want to know right now so they can be well prepared for it. So those are my suggestions, and I'll be glad if you have any questions or comments from y'all concerning what I said.
All right, thank you, Garland. Great hearing from you, and hope all is well out in Iowa. Anyone?
Yep.
Anyone
And just want you to know, Kevin, that me and Heather is coming back to the Chicagoland area in June. It'll be on June 13th as vacation visitors, and then we'll be leaving on June 22nd. So some of your friends at CMAP and Access Living is working for us to find us a place where we can stay as vacation visitors, since my wife will be using a power wheelchair, and then also pray for her too, because she had health problems. Her blood sugar crashed, and then her left leg hurt, and she fell twice, and just want y'all to know to pray for her, and she's recovering, and so just want y'all to pray for her and make her get well before we come in June. So it's a lot of stress on me and getting well prepared for it.
Yeah, certainly, and sorry to hear that, and hope she's doing better and heals up and is back ready to go for Chicago. So we'll hopefully see you when you're out here.
Thanks.
So, thank you, Garland. Doug, any other?
Nope, no others.
All right.
Oh, wait, I think we see John Paul Jones has his hand up. But maybe he doesn't want to talk.
John Paul?
Hello.
There
Hello?
we go. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. This is John Paul Jones with Grover Inglewood, and I just really appreciate the conversations today and the reviews of the amendments and other recommendations with the transportation improvement program. I'm still concerned about all these changes we continue to have with some of these projects. They are cost intensive, and when it happens, it does put a drain on other projects that hopes to get fast tracked when we run into shortcomings of finance. And we had a situation with a raise grant for our Inglewood Trail. I know the city worked with us to advocate for 35 million, but we got 20 million. And you deal with timeframes in which the region must agree with the feds on when projects should happen. Oftentimes they happen, it takes so long. It's hard to keep the community's enthusiasm high, and it oftentimes undermines other projects that are trying to get a real boost from a public investment, like a trail or like a major road improvement. So the more we can kind of fine tune and streamline projects will be to the benefit of all these communities, because we need to see some groundbreaking. A lot of times these regional plans, again, they take so long, and the only ones really are assembling are the engineers. And it's hard to get the citizens to be involved with those conversations with the engineers, are just doing their thing wherever they're at in terms of working in projects. And so, again, the quicker we can get to groundbreaking, the better we can keep people engaged in some of these projects so they can see their own involvement paying off. Once you have to be organizing or working 20, 30 years on one project. We should get out of that cycle. And I think oftentimes, as you indicated in your session a moment ago, with one of the comments, is that, it's typical for these projects to go 20, 30 years, and you still see the same project number up there. Yeah, if we need to phase some projects out, let's phase them out, or get those municipalities to step it up. It shouldn't just be a conversation for engineer guys to just talk about projects for years and years. And we just got to get out beyond that. And I think it happens far too much. Projects that's on the shelf. But I appreciate these conversations. I think the conversation Mr. Armstrong mentioned is something we do want to consider. I was looking at the safety issues downtown, and we don't even talk about this interpretation, but it reminded me of safety, because with the Metropolitan Pier Acquisition Authority, we don't even talk about them anymore, and they rack up a lot of the resources in that area between 35th and Fullerton, Lakefront to Halsted. We should be having them to be much more involved with this transportation plan, and even having them to look at a funding source that can back up the downtown congestion issues. But I think that should be part of the whole state conversation too. How could they, with their quasi agency, help us with transportation financing? That's just my thoughts about that project and the funding. But thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you.
Yes, certainly, and thank you for the comments. Anybody else, Doug or Lindsay?
Looks like Michael Lafarge. I think I'm pronouncing his name. Sorry, my monitor's fairly small with this. I'm going to unmute him.
Okay.
Oh, should be unmuted, Michael.
All right, good day, everyone. Thank you so much for this conversation and this meeting. I tend to agree with John Paul Jones, having been very engaged as a community leader. Many community members do not understand the complexities of the processes that you go through in planning and the externalities and the planning for cost. And if there is some type of way to expedite certain developments in certain areas, so that someone who might have spent 5 years on a project is not dead prior to the start of the project. If a project could be expedited, so be it. It might lend to more community engagement, but I greatly appreciate all of your experience and allowing the community to be on today's meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Anybody else, Doug or Lindsay?
Just double checking, but I believe that is it.
Kevin, I just wanted to quickly respond to Garland's suggestion of engaging members of Congress around the fiscal cliff. Appreciate his interest and passion there. And I will say, the RTA has been meeting with members of the delegation since that $730 million number came out, and discussing a role for the federal government to help address it and close the gap. The RTA is also working with CTA, Metro, and PACE on a trip to DC in late May on this same topic. So we very much are hoping to get support from our federal partners, but we of course can't count on that given the political contours of Congress right now. So we are working this at every level of government and meeting with elected officials who can help solve the problem, including those at the federal level.
Great. Thank you, Kyle, for that response. Moving along, item 9, next meeting is Friday, June 2nd, 2023. So as was mentioned earlier, the governor's disaster declaration is going to expire on May 11th. So we will all be required to come back in person for that meeting. So that'll be on June 2nd. CMAP staff will be sending out some more information shortly about getting to the old post office and how to get in the building and stuff like that soon. So keep your eye out for that. We look forward to seeing you all in person. With that, item 10, adjournment. No other business before us. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Leah, second.
Forbes, second.
There we go. Thank you very much. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Great. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great weekend.